Okay. Great. So why we go through this exercise, it does take a little bit of time. Luckily, we have a smaller group, but why we do that is because it's an example of what peer mentoring is all about. Thank you. It's about sharing your experiences, telling about your injury, and hopefully connecting with others, whether it be resources or psychosocial type support, getting inside each other's head and offering support. Brian and I, we have a really good friendship, and we met at the Center for Independent Living, and through that friendship, we share a lot of the same experiences. Our injuries are very similar, and so that's, again, just an example of peer mentoring. Our technology is not working for my PowerPoint, but I did make copies of this for everyone. But I think I'm going to ask you, what's that? Yeah, well, not really. So I made copies, and I was going to pass these out after the presentation, so you could have the kind of the full packet when you left. If you open it now, it does have some answers that I usually give me examples of. So maybe I'll just follow along mine and ask you to kind of hold off and take these home with you. So I work for Advanced Home Care with Margot, and I also work for the Christopher Reeve Foundation as the Midwest Regional Coordinator of their Peer and Family Support Program. So I cover the Great Lakes states, everything that surrounds the Great Lakes, and we look for people who would be good peers, a lot of you in the room, and we train them and certify them to be certified peer mentors through the foundation. Brian has gone through the training. And unfortunately, we don't do trainings very often, so it's more like we haven't done a training in Michigan for 2 years, and they really want me to do a training in each state before we repeat. So I've done almost every looking at a training up in Flint, in Grand Blanc, where Star Rehab is. So that's why I want to make sure I get everybody's contact information before we leave. Some were in the first hour of the support group, and some of you weren't. So we'll make sure you sign the piece of paper here. So I was injured 23 years ago this Christmas, and I was in the hotel business. A couple guys came in and robbed one of my hotels, and I was shot in the base of the neck and ended up with the bullet caused a spinal cord injury at the T2 level. So my level of paralysis is about up here, and I'm at Asia A. For those of you who don't know what that means, I have a complete injury. So if you want to open up actually to the first page, this is if you want to read along with me, the program mission statement for the Peer and Family Support Program. This says the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Peer and Family Support Program training and certification provides peer mentors with the basic knowledge and skills they need to provide effective support to people who are paralyzed, their family members, and caregivers. What makes our program unique is that we are not only for the people who have the injury themselves, but really for their family members and even their caregivers. So we like to match someone with quadriplegia with someone else with quadriplegia. We like to match wives with other wives that are doing support or not doing support. And caregivers, whether they're with an agency or not, they also need support because they're doing this work every single day, and they need to unwind, and they need to meet with folks and share best practices and kind of share what they're going through, etc. So it's really about bringing folks together and sharing common experiences and getting support from that. And it's all a volunteer basis. It's not trained support through psychologists or through social workers, etc. We like to say that we're sort of the casual social workers without a degree, but our degree is really from hard knocks and from being out there and experiencing, in my case, 23 years of living with a spinal cord injury. So the next page you're allowed to turn to. I feel like a teacher. But this shows the map of the United States, and I am the blue around the Great Lakes, and all my colleagues are the different colors. I got lucky enough to have been able to go out to Hawaii in September and do a training there because our regional coordinator in California was ill and couldn't make it. And I rose my hand and said I would put myself through that, going to Hawaii and doing a training. But what was really cool when I got there is that I met 23 people with spinal cord injuries that live in Honolulu, and I stayed for the week after the training, and they became my friends. And they do every single sport there that has to do with water, and it's all adapted, and they have just a great program there. And luckily, I'm able to go there and stay with friends whenever I want, and I'll take you along with me. It's such a friendly group there, and they're like, just come. So save for your flight, and we'll go get on the water together. But I swam in the ocean there for the first time since my injury, and it was an awesome experience. I had a teacher there that taught me some of the basics about swimming, and some of my friends like Brian kind of laugh at me because he's been swimming ever since his injury, and a lot of folks have. But it was my first experience, and I couldn't swim for a long time because of wounds and for other reasons. So it was an awesome experience, and I want to continue that. So this just gives you an idea of how the territories are broken up, and once a month we all get on the phone and talk about our cases. And the cool thing about this is that I do have trained peers in Michigan, but we often have very special situations that we don't have necessarily a trained peer in my region. So we do a national search, and we get on the phone with each other and we say, does anybody have someone who is ... So it might be a pediatric situation or a bride and groom that were injured together. I mean, we come up with all these situations that are unique, but the cool thing is that we have a national database to look at for peer mentoring, and we can do that remotely, whether it be through Skype or whether it be just on the phone. And we've even had people fly to meet once they really bonded and became friends. So good things happen when we put folks together. So the next page talks about effective peer mentoring. And without turning to the next page, what do you think makes an effective peer mentor? I'd like to get your ideas on what you think makes for a great mentor. Anybody have any ideas?
Listening.
Listening's great. I put listening at the very top. What else? Randy, you've been around a while. What do you think would make a great mentor?
Maybe share the same kind of interests.
Okay.
If it would be sports, or it would be, going to movies, or just to get out. People that are worried about that, getting them, showing them different ways to get around those things.
Many times it's taking yourself back to a week post-injury, if you can remember that, and really getting in that mindset with the person that you're mentoring with, or meeting someone later that's been injured for a while but has never had the support, has never seen the resources. I met a man a couple years ago from northern Michigan, and he didn't know about hand controls. So when I said, he's paraplegic, and I said, do you drive to come down to something? And I remember him saying, dude, I'm paralyzed. I can't drive. And I said, dude, so am I. And I explained about hand controls, and he didn't have access to a computer, to the internet, and there really are people that don't have access to those things. And so we connected. He didn't know that he could meet someone and have children later in life, and he got really excited about those things. And so that's how the peer mentoring works. Who else has an idea of what makes for a good peer mentor?
Having lived the same experience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Being able to pull somebody out to get them to start open up to feel comfortable talking.
Yeah, because you might meet people, especially men. We don't always like to open up and share how we're feeling, but you can, pull that out of folks when you get really down in there and start talking about the emotional things. And if they don't want to talk, then that's usually a green light for you to talk and start sharing. And all of a sudden, this person that has never shared anything, according to the family and according to themselves, is just going at it. And that's a great sign. for a great mentor. Anybody else? Stuart, is there anything, you do mentoring with American Role Models, and is there anything we've missed?
I'm working on a guy right now. He lives in Charlotte. He's a reverend, and he's having a lot of trouble making friends. And I've got a temperament problem and a lot of depression. I just got tired to listen to all of his problems last winter. So he was calling me 6 times a day for a while. And I told him, I said, well, I'm hearing a lot of depression in your voice. And he started studying that. He's changed quite a bit right there.
That's awesome.
And
Yeah.
he's talking to another pastor there in the area. And we got together and we talked about it. And he helped me a lot, too, to keep me going, because I was about ready to give up.
Good.
And,
so you got something from him, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, well, I'm still excited about helping him and keep him going. And
Very cool. That's exactly what peer mentoring is. So if you turn to the next page, I always say we've all been mentors in some way or another. Everybody, even folks without disabilities. You ever been in the grocery line and somebody starts talking to you, and then you spark up a conversation, and maybe you gave them advice, or they gave you advice, or maybe, you know, with friends you've done this, or I'm sure with family you've knocked some things back and forth. Well, that's mentoring. So whether you've done this as a trained peer mentor like myself and Brian and Stuart, then maybe you recognize that you've done it on your own as well. Some of the characteristics are patience. Really sitting there and listening. Listening is the biggest asset to a good peer mentor, and it's difficult when you have a lot to share. When you want to get everything out to tell them you're going to be okay, and we do sports, and we do this, and we do that. Well, I didn't want to hear about playing wheelchair basketball when I was able to only sit up for about 15 minutes. I couldn't even think about that, but somebody was just determined to tell me that they wanted me on their basketball team and I was going to play basketball, etc. I sucked playing basketball before my injury, and I sucked after too. So I'll stick to hand cycling and maybe tennis with Brian someday. I don't know if he has patience. I can play wheelchair tennis if you hit it right to me. That's how I play. But I can't chase after the ball. I'm too old for that. But yeah, there you go. So patience, attentiveness, empathy, and being easy to talk to. And I think we all covered that when we were... So not turning to the next page, what do you think some of the do's and don'ts might be in mentoring? We've already discussed you don't want to start blabbing right away. You want to learn about them. Because in that relationship, it's really all about them, not necessarily about you, until you get the green light to start sharing. And you're going to share slowly, because hopefully you're creating a relationship that's going to continue. So some of the do's and don'ts. Can anybody think of some things you don't want to do? Yes.
My main one is just saying to somebody, I know exactly what you're telling me.
Absolutely.
I know exactly what you're going through, because every single situation is completely different, and every injury is completely different. We might be in the same paralysis at the same level,
Right.
but it may have affected nerves differently. So everything is completely.
Our family lives are different.
They're different,
Yeah, because Brian and I have very similar injuries. We were injured differently, very differently, and we have different home lives and interests, etc. So that's a perfect example of saying, I know what you're going through. You could say, I remember this. I tell people that I know are going to be off a ventilator, I tell them that I was on one, and I know it's hell to be weaned off, but I wouldn't necessarily say that to a quadriplegic that may be on a vent for the rest of their life. So you do have to be really cognizant of what you're saying. I have a peer mentor that comes to the unit, and she is a walking quad, and she was going to be meeting with a lot of people with complete quadriplegia, and I said, you might want to stay in your chair. That will really confuse a brand new patient and maybe give them a little bit of false hope about walking. And so she completely agreed, and she stayed in her chair, and she behaved as I asked her to. But you just have to think about those things. It's very hard for me to talk to someone with quadriplegia about the way my life goes, because as you were hearing from, some of you heard from Dan, who has a complete C1 injury. He doesn't move anything below his neck. He and I have some similar experiences, and that's why we hit it off, but really he needs to meet somebody who is a quad-on event and find out what their interests are and what's worked and what hasn't worked for them. So it's all about that matching. So why don't you turn to the next page so we can move things along. You know, you want to ask open-ended questions, not things that are going to just evoke a yes or a no, because that doesn't foster a conversation. So you want to ask open-ended questions. Don't, like I said, don't overshare your experiences unless they're really wanting to know. Let them ask you questions. You don't want to overshare. But again, the reason why it's the first bullet, the listen, is because it's the most important. I feel it's the most important. We're going to talk a little bit later about body language, but do observe their body language. If they're getting bored and they're not looking at you in the eyes, you might need to shift directions. And again, it might be because you're oversharing. So that's something that I always watch for. Obviously, you're not going to glance up at the clock or do one of these, you know, when you're talking to them, even if it's going over the amount of time that you guys set up in the first place. So, and you want to choose a time and place to chat as best as you can. You're not going to probably meet someone in their home, first off. It's not safe. It's not necessarily safe. You don't know really what kind of environment they're in. They might not know if you're, you know, cool as far as being safe, etc. So a lot of times we meet in restaurants, meet at McDonald's or Starbucks or something like that. And then the cool thing about peer mentoring is that once you get to know them, you do visit homes because their homes are accessible, unlike most homes that you have to get bumped up into and or have to meet somewhere else. A lot of times the family gatherings are at your house because they're accessible. But it's cool because you get to go into people's homes and once you've met and so forth. So the next page, and all these things are what we do in a training when we do a training with the Reeve Foundation. So you're getting just sort of a feel of some of the things that we cover. But how do you think ethics and your personal values fit into peer mentoring? Let's talk about ethics first. There are some boundaries that you can and cannot cross, and maybe Nancy, she didn't get to introduce herself, but tell them what your role is at U of M, and maybe you could answer a couple, have some ideas about ethics.
I'm the rehabilitation psychologist on inpatient for spinal cord injury and also some outpatient work. And Darlene Klein and I co-facilitate the spinal cord injury support group. As far as boundaries, I think this comes up in a lot of ways. There's no one way to define it, but it's one way to think about it is when what you're talking about really has more to do with you than what's useful in the situation and encounter with that person. So I know what comes to mind for me right off the bat is a patient I have who is, it's part of his identity to talk about politics. And it's easy for me in some ways because I'm usually agreeing with things he's saying, but not always. But even so, it's still not about me. And what if he were, you know, talking about politics in a way I completely disagreed with? It's even more true that I need to keep myself out of the equation, but just supporting that this is part of his identity and listening with interest and reflecting that, you know, it's important to him to remember who he is even when he's in the hospital with serious illness. So just kind of looking at things from their perspective and not so much what it means to you. Boundary issues can just come up in lots of ways. Assuming that you know what's best for somebody, when they just, even if you are correct medically, they may just need more time to process the information. So the boundary of not trying to, you know, push information into their ears when, you know, you can tell they've got some barriers up about it. And you will not infrequently find out that they were right in how they wanted to handle something for them in their situation. So.
Yeah, and as Connie knows, because she sees all the patients with new spinal cord injuries in the hospital, she's going to them to first meet them and introduce herself and recruit them for studies that could help the whole population of people with spinal cord injuries. But she also recognizes that patients get overwhelmed with information. And so we have to be cognizant of that as well, that they're getting a lot of paperwork and they're getting a lot of folks popping in their room and saying, hi, I'm so-and-so. And I remember being a patient. I was in the hospital for 6 months and we met a lot of people. And I met a Connie at that time that came in and got me to sign up for the registry to be in research projects. But does anybody have any other ideas for ethics and values? Mary?
You're probably learning a lot about their personal health information.
Exactly.
So that's kind of a big deal to not just go and talk to other people about that, or to tell them that it's up to them to share what they want to share about all the health stuff that's going on.
Yeah, you end up in a mentoring relationship, you end up really hearing some very, very personal stuff, maybe things this person's never shared before with someone in their family or with friends. I mean, really, really personal things. And so, has anybody ever heard of HIPAA? Mm-hmm. Most of the professionals? It's a huge initiative. I guess it's a huge rule. That's why I call it hippopotamus. It just helps me kind of remember there's a hippo in the room. And so when we see a hippo, we zip up our mouths. It's called be careful what you share. You don't want to share names with other folks. You don't even want to share situations like, oh, I met somebody that was in a car accident and it was horrific. It was on 96 and it was in May and there were 3 people involved, and et cetera. All of a sudden people are deducing and figuring out who that was. And so all of a sudden that story is being shared, and it's being shared because you opened that door. So confidentiality is huge, and that's the trust that you have to build when you're meeting someone. You have to tell them right off, look, what you share is between the two of us, doesn't go beyond this door. But also be careful, me and Brian will talk, or me and Nancy will talk about patients, etc. We have to make sure we're in a quiet room and that we're not being heard by anyone else. So we definitely want to be cognizant of that as well. So if we turn to the next page, the definition of ethics is the principles of conduct governing a person or group. Identify 3 key ethical values and practices of a peer mentor, and we've just gone over that. Respect, privacy, and confidentiality, right? So it's really funny, we do some scenarios, and I'll tell you about those really quick because there is a slide here. But recognize respectful actions of a peer mentor. We don't judge the client that we're working with. We don't pressure or direct the client. How about we describe ways to maintain privacy and confidentiality? We've talked about that. Private location, private conversation when possible. Confidentiality is keeping their information private, not sharing the intimate details of that case and of that client. So the next page, we do a whole breakout session here, and we do role playing, and it gets really funny. But let's look at scenario number 3. So there's a peer mentor, a client, and a family member, and this is between the peer mentor and the client. So whoever's following along, who wants to read the peer mentor part? Randy?
I'm supposed to be the scenario 1?
Scenario 3.
You
Go ahead and just read that paragraph.
You just finished the meeting with a client.
No. Go over to scenario 3. Yep.
You are at a local concert and you have just run into a client's family member. Respond as best as you can.
So let's have Mary read family member.
For scenario 3.
Yep.
You're at a local concert. You have just run into the peer mentor for your family member. You think the peer mentor is cute and say, I've liked you since the first time I met you. I'd like to get you to know you even better, if you know what I mean. Wink. Here's my personal cell phone number. Please call me soon so we can get together for a good time. Smile and wink. I'll be waiting for your call, cutie.
It's kind of cheesy, but it always gets a few laughs, especially when people really get into the role playing. But so, in other words, to kind of paint this picture, there's a peer mentor that mentors, let's say, your brother, right? And that's Mary. You've run into this family member, which is a guy, at this concert, and he really wants to get to know you. Now you're the mentor for the family member.
So am I the peer mentor?
Yeah, you're the peer mentor, and I think, I guess Randy's the peer mentor, and you're the family member. Okay?
So I'm hitting on Randy right now.
Right, exactly. So, yeah.
Figure I was done with my part here.
There you go. So Randy, Randy is a peer mentor to your brother. Okay, we'll put it that way. And so, do you think that that would make for a good peer mentoring match for you to possibly meet Randy for coffee and think about possibly a relationship?
Oh, that could be conflicting.
In what ways?
Well, we'd probably have to talk to Randy's brother and see what he thought about it, because I think probably the first responsibility you'd have is like to your mentee or your fellow mentor.
Right.
And to figure out if you want to keep that really professional, or if like you're at the phase in your mentorship where you're all like friends and it's not as much like a professional relationship.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have an opinion on this little pickup scenario?
I think we tend to envision how it could be okay, that everything would go okay. We don't necessarily think of like how many new relationships last and how many end with some kinds of hard feelings. And so then now you've decided you don't, care for this person anymore, but your mentee still likes their brother, and it just
That song,
awkward.
Blurred Lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might affect, it very likely could affect the relationship with the person you were mentoring, even if you all felt very informal and friendly and didn't think it'd be a problem. Imagine your first fight, and it's like,
Anybody else? You were smiling. Do you have a...
I'm just enjoying the role playing.
Okay. Stuart?
Can I be excused? I gotta do a calf.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, can you imagine if this mentor is talking to the family member and they say, hey, is your brother really going to physical therapy 3 times a week? Because he's telling me he is. Or is your brother really on a diet? Because he's not losing weight, and he tells me every day that all he eats is carrots and celery. So can you imagine kind of the blurred lines there? That would be that would not be good. So I guess that's the point of this. A lot of guys, and now Mary joins the group, try to, like Nancy said, figure out where it might work. So everybody's happy. Everybody's one big group, and really that scenario never really works. No matter how, even if you say, you know what, I do like you, let's end the mentoring relationship or find a new mentor. I mean, that may work, but still, now you're dating someone from your mentee, and you're still going to see each other. So it's probably best to walk away from that situation. Sorry, Brian. Yeah. Brian is one that would try to make it work in some way. So if you go to the next page, interpersonal communication, how you're going to communicate with the client, both verbally and non-verbally. Can anybody tell me a little bit about maybe what nonverbal communication might be in a relationship where you're sharing together? Things you might notice, things you might look at. Body language? Like, give me an example.
Well, just like nodding a lot and showing somebody, but then looking off maybe, and like you said, or looking at your clock or your watch. The body language, perception that you're not really in tune with what they have to say. You've got other things going on. They'll pick up on those things fairly quickly, and then they feel like you're not really including them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Paying attention to what the
starts to close in a little bit.
Like this?
Yeah, it's territory they're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
I'm
They,
so cold.
but that, yeah.
No, but I mean, it's not
See, I
like
know.
blanket statement, but I mean, it goes along with.
Yeah. But see, I know that I didn't even see your arms crossed because you've been nodding when you agree with things, so I know that you're engaged. But you can tell when someone's engaged or not engaged. You know when it's working or not working.
Folding into themselves, not necessarily crossing their arms, but.
And now they're looking at their watch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're waiting for you to get the hell out of there. So,
It's also how you dress even. So, do you have heavy duty perfume or not?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a huge no-no.
When I mentor on the unit,
Yes, me.
when I'm,
You wear a tie, don't
yes, exactly. But I learned that really early on at the center. When I was working at the center, I was often in a suit or a shirt and tie because of the other work that I did. And then I go to the hospital to be a mentor, and they're in a hospital gown or sweats. And so now I wear sort of exercise clothes when I go to the unit just to feel sort of comfortable with everybody else. And it's really cool that I'm able to do that and not have to wear a tie every day. But yeah, you have to really put yourself in that mindset. And it brings up a good point that not every match is going to work. Not every match is going to be a match, if you will. So you're going to meet with someone and all of a sudden it's determined that I don't really like this guy. We don't have a lot in common. I just don't resonate with him. And so it's okay. It's okay on both sides for the mentor to say, you know what, I'm not really feeling this, or for the mentee to do the same thing. So let's turn to the next page. Talk about understanding nonverbal. You can see some of these things we've talked about: facial expressions and body language, sending them and reading them, gestures, tone of voice and pace of conversation. So your tone of voice really matters as well. If you're talking kind of monotone and everything sounds about the same, you're not going to be impressive as a peer mentor. Making eye contact really shows that you're listening, directly looking in someone's eyes, not at their nose, not above their head. Just when you're staring in someone's eyes and they're looking back at you, there's a connection, and you feel it and they feel it, and it's important, right, Nancy? Active listening, we've talked about. Person-centered language, does anybody know really what that means? It's politically correct language, person-centered language. Person first. So you are you. You're not a chair. You're not a spinal cord injury. You're not a stroke. You're not an MS. Sometimes, I haven't heard it in a long time, but sometimes I've heard clinicians talk about people with spinal cord injuries as cords. We have 5 cords on the unit right now. I was speaking to a cord. I was doing this with a cord, the cord's family. Isn't that grotesque? I mean, that's just one of the worst descriptions that I've heard describing someone with a spinal cord injury. You know, he's a paraplegic, or using the disability first before you talk about the person. So I am a man who uses a wheelchair. I'm a man that has paraplegia. I have paraplegia. So usually when I describe myself on the phone, if it's relative to making a reservation, to doing something like that, I say I use a wheelchair. My name's Tom, I use a wheelchair, so we need a table that's going to accommodate 2 wheelchairs. Yes?
Yeah, and something I still notice, I'm not sure how much progress we're making in the media, let alone in healthcare, as far as the equipment that people use, instead of recognizing a lot of this technology of one form or another. So somebody will say they're wheelchair bound instead of they use a wheelchair.
Yeah.
You know, it's something the person uses. And the last one that I noticed that I haven't heard any headway on is ventilator-assisted breathing. You know, I use a vent, and my breathing is assisted with a ventilator. I'm
Yeah.
not vent-dependent.
Yeah.
Or the vent dependent.
It's almost like their last name
Yeah.
is vent dependent.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
think most clinicians, the very opposite of person first is the most common. I think it's kind of for shorthand. You know, it's like, okay,
saying cord, or do you have one?
Or, well, like a lot of times I'll hear like wheelchair in whatever room, or you know, something like that.
Or even SCI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hear it more from clinicians, I think, than from individuals themselves.
I think one of the most offensive is wheelchair bound.
Yeah.
You hear it a lot in the media, no matter how much you tell WDIV to stop saying it.
Yeah.
I mean, at the center, we were always sending consultants and we were always faxing politically correct language, and they still say it because it's newsworthy and it sounds like a victim.
Kind
I've
of
actually-
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, kind of Jerry Springer.
I've gotten that from a patient's family member in a waiting room. I'm like, quite the opposite. I would be very bound to something if I didn't have my chair. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, we get out of our chairs, we go to bed, we take showers, we drive, we water ski, we, do all kinds of things. We're not bound to our chairs. And I don't like being, even though I was a victim of an armed robbery, I'm still not comfortable with that word. Because I was a victim of violence, but my life hasn't really been about gun control. It hasn't been about anything to do with the way I was injured. It's more about helping folks with spinal cord injuries adjust to their new injury. So that's sort of the platform I took. I respect the folks that are doing the gun control and working on that end, but I just couldn't make it my sort of badge of honor. So there are other examples of saying the blind person instead of the woman who is blind or the woman who is visually impaired, hearing impaired, deaf. Those are all still correct. That's all correct terminology, but you do need to put that person first. It's a mouthful to say, I'm a man that uses a wheelchair, or I'm a man with paraplegia, instead of saying I'm paraplegic, or I'm a cord, So it is a mouthful, but keep sharing with folks when you hear that. Keep sharing that you want to hear that person-centered language first, and that's correct.
I had a gentleman he goes, people like you, but how's his tone of voice, I guess?
Yeah.
It didn't sound or feel right.
Yeah.
And he goes, people like you, but
Nothing good can come after that.
No.
Well,
No.
it was like and I'm like, I didn't think I liked you much before, not like
Yeah.
you that much now. But
It's-
was there
it's
something
really
else
a-
I could say to that gentleman, like?
Yeah, you
well,
can
not
say-
people like you, who? I mean, what is, or engage him, and like, what do you mean? I don't know. What
Yeah.
can I say to somebody like
Right.
that?
Yeah, I remember someone asking me how I got screwed up. And they were like pointing to my chair, because I am screwed up, but he was referring to, I was at my neighbor's at Halloween, and he was referring to my chair and so forth, and I said, I'm not screwed up. And he goes, oh, you're going to play with me. And I'm like, no, I'm not playing. It's just kind of offensive to say that to someone. So if you're asking me how I got to use a chair, I'll tell you the story. And I think you've been, drinking a little. It was Halloween. But I'm always educating folks, but doing it in a nice way. You don't want to put people down or give folks with disabilities a bad name that we're all angry about. We don't like being called wheelchair bound, and we don't like being called crippled. I meet patients in the hospital that automatically. I silenced my phone, but my alarm isn't a part of that. So I meet folks that say, well, now I'm crippled, so I can't do anything else. And slowly while I'm meeting with them, I try to get them to recognize that it's kind of a word that was used a long time ago, and that it's really not politically correct to use. And maybe you can just start using your name and saying, I use a wheelchair because. Margot?
John, don't you think it's just sometimes people, they use words that are a throwback, or they're just they're not really meaning to be insulting in any way. It's just their level, their vocabulary, or
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
they do need to be corrected. I like what
Trying
you
to
said.
communicate.
You were defensive to them, but you let them know, that's not how we.
Yeah, you can
direct
say, hey,
conversations
can I
with
run
someone."
something by you? I learned very early on, or you could even say, I was using some language that really I found out later was offensive, and I understand why. I understand why wheelchair bound isn't correct. And so that's a way of kind of approaching it without being too, look how good we danced. That went so quickly. Yeah. So, it's just it's just common sense thinking about that. So I know we're kind of out of time, but I want to go through actually it's the last part of it. Know that the Reeve Foundation is one of the biggest resources for resources. Our website, yes, it's overwhelming. It's being redone. Lots of consultants are being paid a lot of money telling them what they need and don't need. And I'm a part of that, helping them with the website and so forth. But they have information specialists on, ready to go on the phone. We have paralysis resource guides and translation services. It's available, this book, I brought some, but I'm going to tell you they are the older edition. The newer edition we're short on them, but I'm getting a bunch sent. But this old edition has tons of great information in it that's still relevant. There's stories in it. Marty, if you could get that box behind you out, and if you want one, take them with you. They're free. And make sure I get your contact information. I can send you or drop off a new version. So they're available in hard copy in English and Spanish. They're available online in English and Spanish. There's our website for the resource guide, paralysis.org. Click on Paralysis Resource Guide. So what I think is really cool is that we have access to speakers for over 150 languages. That's on the next slide if you turn the page. So you call that 800 number and we're ready to go for you. Then I think the last page is really just wrapping up and answering any questions and finding out if you're interested in becoming a peer mentor. So does anybody have any questions? I went a lot quicker than, basically this information, I did take out a bunch of slides, but this is a full day that we tried to squeeze into an hour. So I'm sorry if it felt like we were speeding through, but I really wanted to make sure we got to everything. So, and I have brochures for the Peer and Family Support Program, and I have business cards. So I'm running out of my advanced home care cards, but on my Christopher Reeve cards, my cell phone is on it and my email address. So, and you can take these with you. I should have put a slide in here with my contact information, but Nancy's passing out the business cards, the brochures, and Marty, in that little blue box are my business cards, if you wouldn't mind passing one out to everybody. Yeah, yep. Thought it was blue, but it's black. So questions. What do you think of this information?
Can I go back to the brochure bound?
Yes.
Tangent? So I cannot figure out how to sensitively tell someone, stop leaning on me or my chair.
Right.
Just because I pick up my foot doesn't mean you can put your foot there.
Yeah.
And actually it happens to your relatives.
Yeah. And so they, you can take that. Yeah, you can take that in a couple different ways. Our wheelchairs are a part of our body now. It's us. We use it as our legs. We use it to go from point A to B. It's very personal to us. For me, I kind of like it when someone kneels next to me and they kind of lean on my wheel. It shows that we're bonding. It shows that they're really into what I'm saying. It shows that if they've squatted down, that they recognize that standing way up here is kind of uncomfortable for us. So I love it when people do that. But when people take it upon themselves that you don't know, or you've got a relative that does it, that probably does it too much.
Or they pull back on my chair, I'm trying to get through a door.
That's the worst.
I'm like.
Or how about, have you ever been going up a hill and you're struggling, but you want to work out, you want to struggle, and someone comes up behind you and starts pushing you? Well, it's the equivalent to Connie standing, up in front of me and me pushing on her back. Move along, right?
Yeah.
If you ask me, do you want help up the hill? I might say yes, or I might politely say, you know what, I'm working out here. So I appreciate you asking, but, so it's all about personal space. It's all about being asked and educating someone and saying, you know what, I like to be asked about the door. Some of us like opening the door for ourselves. Sometimes people get overzealous and they try to open the door and then they stand there with their feet in the way. Yeah. And so you're doing this weird dance, but you don't want to hurt someone's feelings and say, I can get the door. What do I look like? That's when you start talking defensively, a wall goes up, and people don't want to work with you, and you're giving a bad name to folks with disabilities.
I just don't know how to like bring up, hey, it's not cool for you to be hanging all over me in my chair or holding me back when I'm trying to move forward.
Well, let's
Like,
problem
it's not
solve.
funny.
Let's problem solve. How do you think, does anybody have advice?
Could I ask,
Yeah.
could I ask you not to lean on my wheelchair because it A, B, and C?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah. It's kind of, you probably haven't done it because it's awkward, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I would feel more comfortable if it was a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that'd be, I'm totally open to education and like that, whether I like it or not, that's kind of, a part of everyday life just because of situations, but because it's a family member that I have to see all the time, I don't want to be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just not cool, dude.
Yeah. Now, if you're dating and, someone puts their foot up on your lap or, wants to sit on your lap or whatever, you're probably going to handle that a little differently because they're expressing themselves, etc. So, yeah, I mean, just come out and say, you annoy me. No,
I mean,
but...
is it offensive to say, like, please don't do that? Or like...
No, but it is the way...
I feel like I might get a little bit short.
Yeah, it's the way, it's always in the way you deliver it.
Yeah.
I would say, I understand that you're sort of trying to bond with me or whatever, but it just, there's reasons why I don't like it, and, maybe we stop doing it. How about you?
Let me just say that I think they may be uncomfortable. They don't know how to handle it. I think that's probably why they do what they do, because they don't know how to
Yeah.
address it. So sometimes people do things that maybe they just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So they just do weird things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
They get nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get nervous.
They get nervous. They don't know how to handle it.
I mean, we all know how John Q. Public, that if they don't know someone with a disability in their family or their friends, if they don't work in the industry, they might have never really encountered disability. So all of a sudden, they look at us like we have three heads, right? Or that we're going to attack, or that we're going to infect, or whichever. And it's really, for me, it's all about making them feel comfortable. So a lot of times I'll be getting out of my van on my ramp, and people will be kind of walking by pretending they don't see me, and because that's most comfortable, and I'll shout out hello, and they'll be like, oh my God, it speaks, and so, but you're making them comfortable. All of a sudden they slow down and they say, that thing's really cool, tell me about it. And so that's kind of how to make people feel more comfortable around disability. It's not necessarily their fault, it's just they haven't been exposed to it. So it's all about education and making people feel comfortable and doing it in a friendly way, if you will.
I was going through Menards one day. This guy was coming at me and was supposed to go this way, supposed to go that way. And I went past him. I said, I did that on purpose. He said, laughed at me.
Yeah.
Minutes later, he did it right back to me.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's really cool when you run into people that give you that smile that says, I connect with you, not the condescending, I feel bad for you, but it's that smile that lets you know that's a cool person. And even if they don't have disability in their life, they were raised well to be nice to whoever it is. I remember avoiding being around somebody that had a really, really, really what I call severe case of cerebral palsy, and their speech was so affected by it that it was really sounds that came out. But I felt that she felt like we were supposed to understand everything she was saying. And so at the center, when I worked there, I would avoid her, which is the worst thing to do. But I would avoid her until I finally figured out a way to communicate with her. And I would just come out and say, you know what, I don't understand what you're saying, but can I guess? Because we'd be in a situation. When her husband was with her, he knew everything she was saying, and that was really cool. And then she got a voice box that she preloaded things based on where she was going, and that was cool. So I learned a lesson that, if you work with somebody that has an auditory disability, what they want, my friend Chris, who has CP, what he prefers is that you repeat back what you did hear. So he's not going through this whole paragraph again. But, I mean, does that happen to you? Where people, yeah, so what do you do when someone says, hey, I didn't get that? Do you get annoyed?
I'm very annoyed.
Yeah.
But if repeat it, I do the when she breastfeeds,
Yeah.
I over-enunciate.
Okay. And you have to, the people you're talking to have to exercise that patience if they want to interact with you.
Exactly.
I just got yelled at yesterday from him because he says I correct. I
didn't yell.
Well, not yell. He's correcting me.
Well, you're his wife, right?
Yeah.
So that happens
You got-
anyway.
You got to, you got to stop talking for me. If they don't understand me, I want to tell them.
Perfect.
Again, so
Yeah. And that's a part of that disability awareness thing. Have you ever gone somewhere, you're in the chair, you have the disability, and they might ask you, does he need a roll-in shower or a tub bed? Right in front of them.
Yeah.
That happened when I was married. That happened with me and my wife all the time. And me and my friend Carolyn we used to do these disability awareness workshops, and she's legally blind. And we tell this story about us being out together in a restaurant, and the waitress saying to her, what will he have? And I say, you're asking her, she's blind. So, you could joke around about it, and you can make light, but it's really educating folks. I'm right here. I can speak for myself. And if I can't speak for myself, then I'm going to give permission to the person I'm with to help me out. So you guys have been great, especially staying over a little bit. We got a little bit late of a start, but does anybody have any questions or comments based on this information? That means we did a good job all together.
You did a super job.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
well.
So make sure, I think, Mary, I have yours, but I'd still like you to write down your contact information. Randy, I'd like yours again, and I forgot your name.
Rachel.
Rachel, I'd like to have your contact information, and you guys wrote on the sheet, right? So, Brian, I don't want your contact information, but no, go ahead and keep these now. You can keep these and refer to them. If you really feel like you're not going to keep these, just hand them back and I'll use them in another way. That shows me that you really didn't care about what we talked about, but that's all right. No, seriously, turn them back in because we did go over everything in the packet.
That's a lot of ink in it.
Yeah.
I would just recycle it later.
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you.
I was gonna put it in my shirt, but then
Remember, our next